Did you know that an Irish scribe over 1,000 years ago used Ogham to jot down a note about being hungover in the margins of a Latin grammar book? It turns out Ogham wasn't just carved into stone by our ancestors, it also made its way into medieval manuscripts, shaping Irish scholarly traditions in ways you might not expect. In today's episode on the Ogham Academy YouTube channel and podcast, we're exploring how this ancient script evolved from boundary markers and gravestones into the hands of medieval scholars. From secret codes to linguistic theories, Ohm's journey didn't stop with the stones. It transformed into a powerful intellectual tool. The medieval intelligentsia here in Ireland were very, very fond of the Ogham. So grab a cuppa and settle in as we discover the unexpected, perhaps, story of manuscript Ogham and the medieval Irish grammatical tradition. So we're definitely dealing here with more than just Ogham stone inscriptions. Ogham is our ancient alphabet here in Ireland. It's primarily known from stone inscriptions dating between the 4th and the 7th centuries Common Era. So these inscriptions were often marking territorial boundaries between different tribal kingships or serving as memorials. And they really provide us a window into very early Irish society. Now, the 4th century date is what we can actually prove. However, it might go back a couple of hundred years before that, even back to the 1st century. So beyond the stones, though, Ogham found a brand new life in medieval manuscripts, reflecting the evolving scholarly traditions of Ireland and really how the Irish scholars wanted to be seen as just as important in our history and our heritage, as the classical Greek and Roman schools of scholarship. So they were very keen to make sure that we had this history of a great literary tradition, if you like, stretching back. So one of the earliest examples of Ogham in a manuscript comes from a 9th century called St. Gall Prisian Glosses. And here an ancient scribe, perhaps after a night of drunkenness, revelry was probably involved somewhere along the way, scribed the word Lathert, Latheiort, in Ogham. And this was in the margins, marginalia. And the word means oscailga in Irish, excessive drunkenness or hangover. And it was written again in the margins of this Latin grammar text that he was working on. Now, this could have been maybe to explain some mistakes. It could have been just random doodling. It could have been any number of reasons. We don't obviously know exactly why. It maybe gives us a little bit of insight into medieval student life. But it does tell us something important. So by the 9th century, Ogham was still being used and understood well enough for a scholar to jot down casual notes in it and presumably to be understood as well. This was long after the stone inscriptions had stopped being carved, for the most part, showing that Ogham had moved from practical use within the monument tradition into this more intellectual and literary space in the manuscript tradition. So Ogham in Irish scholarly tradition, we are famously known as the island of saints and scholars. And while the Dark Ages was happening through Europe, here in Ireland, we had this massive scholarly tradition. People were sending nobles from all over Europe were sending their children here to be educated, their sons, let's call it what it is. But beyond this, informal notes in manuscripts, Ogham really became a subject of study in its own right. The Orakept n-Éces, or the Scholar's Primer, is one of the key texts that discusses the Ogham. So it's an old Irish grammatical work that treats Ogham as a sophisticated script, even suggesting it was divinely inspired. The origin stories within that, the Scholar's Primer, are interesting. One theory about how the Ogham was invented was the Tuatha Dé Danann god Oma. And the other one was that it was the culmination of examining all sorts of languages, and basically Irish was the best one, and then the script was developed around that. So this made it more than just a writing system, more than just an alphabet. It gave it a spiritual dimension, which personally I believe it would have had in the monument tradition as well, even though we can't categorically state that, of course. But if you're using Ogham to mark territories, there is a protective or warding magical element about that, possibly, probably. And if you're using it as memorial stones, as grave markers, there is a spiritual element of ancestral reverence in there as well. And possibly combining the two, we are using the protective aspects of the ancestors as well as the protective elements of the Ogham. And we know from other mythology that Ogham was used in spells, and particularly as this kind of boundary, this warding that it's very, very popular for through the mythological literature, at least. So here we have the spiritual element maybe starting to come back into it. But it really was viewed as a sacred tradition for the Irish, worthy of deep study in these very important scholarly houses, monasteries, all of that. Excuse me. Another significant manuscript that we have is in Lora O'Brien, also known as the Ogham Tract. And this work details different forms of Ogham, so like how it was being used, including variations that are not found on stone. So obviously it was being used, it was being adapted, it was being worked with in that contemporary spiritual aspect or contemporary scholarly aspect, or both. So the Ogham Tract provides explanations of its structure, its rules, and even different ways that it could be written, some of which might have been used for coded messages or, again, magical inscriptions. So these texts show us that medieval Irish scholars were fascinated by their own linguistic heritage. And indeed, in my own research, one of the questions that was coming up for me as an Irish historian doing a master's was whether that medieval fascination had continued and whether it played a part in the development of the Irish identity in the 18th and 19th centuries. And, you know, I wrote a whole thesis on it for my master's. You can find it here at the Ogham Academy. I'll put a link below. If you're interested in the more academic side of things, through the revolutionary period, through the end of colonization in part of our island, at least, because, you know, part of it is still colonized. But medieval scholars were adapting Ogham. They were exploring its possibilities. They were ensuring that it remained part of Ireland's evolving intellectual landscape. And I like to think that I am continuing that tradition. That's where it's part of my ancestral heritage, if you like, even if it's not direct lineage. I don't know if it is bloodlines or anything, but it is certainly part of my social, cultural, and probably spiritual ancestry that I work with the Ogham in these ways, adapting it, exploring its possibilities, and ensuring that it remained part of Ireland's, or will remain part of Ireland's evolving intellectual and spiritual landscape as we move forward. So why does this matter today? Why does this history matter? The shift from stone inscriptions to a manuscript study really reflects this broader change in Irish scholarly traditions that was happening at the time. And what started out as possibly only a practical system. Now, again, I have personal doubts about that, but we'll give it, right? Just say it only started out as a purely practical alphabet, right? For marking land and honouring the dead. It definitely went on to become a tool for education, grammar, and even creativity. So as the Irish language evolved, the Ogham evolved with it. And the fact that Ogham was still being written and studied in medieval Ireland tells us something critical. Ogham wasn't forgotten. and it hasn't been forgotten to this day. It wasn't a lost language of the past. It was an evolving, dynamic part of Irish intellectual life, Irish culture, Irish society, and again forms part of our Irish heritage to this day. And today, it remains an important symbol of our linguistic and cultural heritage and of the, let's say, lack of savagery that certain colonial oppressors were very, very keen to believe that Ireland was barbaric and savage, and definitely portrayed us in that way. And Ogham was one of the things that we could hold up as a shining example that, hey, to ourselves as much as to anybody else, hey, we have this fantastic intellectual history here. We have this spiritual history here. We have this grounding deeply rooted in our past, in our ancestry. And Ogham really became a keystone or a touchstone for this evolving Irish identity. And again, I believe it remains it to this day. So if you're interested in exploring Ogham further, I have got something for you. I have developed a free guide to Ogham. It's a downloadable PDF that you can get. So you will get more comfortable with the visuals of Ogham, with the alphabet itself. Ogham is not a language, it's an alphabet or a script. And this is one of the ways that you can learn it. But instead of just searching on the internet for random new age crap, here you're getting a very good academic basis in it, but also space being held for a spiritual connection to it, an ancestral connection to it, and even a magical connection to it. So all of that is very important to me, and it's what I would like to gift to you. So you can understand the letters, their meanings, how they can still be used in spiritual and scholarly practice today. So I will put a link to that below. It is ogham.academy/guide, ogham.academy/guide, and you will be able to get your guide to the Ogham. So gur míle maith agat for joining me today. If you enjoyed this video, this podcast episode, please subscribe and share it with others who are passionate about Ireland, Ireland's heritage, our culture, our language. And until next time, honour the lore, respect the wisdom, and slán go fóill. I will see you in the next video.